Hi everyone, glad you've joined us for Southern Michigan SABR Day 2021. I'm Nathan Bierma, incoming president of SABR Southern Michigan. I'm excited about the year that lies ahead for our chapter, and I'm looking forward to connecting with each of you, and I'm especially grateful to my colleagues in our chapter leadership who have been facilitating today. I regret that a prior commitment prevents me from joining you live, but I wanted to be sure to join you by recording, both to greet you and also to tell you about an event that happened earlier this month, our Hank Greenberg 110th Birthday Virtual Symposium. This was an event I was pleased and honored to moderate that included Steve Greenberg, the son of Hank Greenberg, Aviva Kempner, the filmmaker who made the life and times of Hank Greenberg, and John Rosengren, who wrote the biography Hank Greenberg, Hero of Heroes. It was a delightful event. We began with researcher Herm Krabenhoft, who presented his research on the Tigers' RBI totals in the 1930s for Greenberg and his teammates. Krabenhoft found about 10 years ago that Greenberg's RBI tally in 1937, which remains the third highest in baseball history, was actually 184 instead of 183, although subsequent research found that Greenberg was still behind Lou Gehrig, who Greenberg was very intent on chasing. But we talked a little bit about why RBIs were so significant to Greenberg and why that record, that total in 1937, actually meant more to Greenberg than his home run chase of Babe Ruth in 1938, which is surprising, but once you look into it, you can find out why. After we heard from Herm, we moved on to our panel, and we talked to them, got each of their perspectives on what Hank Greenberg meant to them personally and to the Jewish community and to baseball fans as a whole. It was really enjoyable to hear their insights, and it was notable to me that we did not have full consensus on the point of whether Hank Greenberg was underrated in baseball history, with two panelists saying he definitely was, and another saying that for a player who played almost a century ago, his name still comes up quite a lot among baseball historians and in the Jewish community today. So you can listen in and hear for yourself. What follows now are a few highlights from our panel. Each of our panelists, Steve, Aviva, and John, to give you a taste of what the event was like. You can watch the full video at sabr.org/events, and we will feature it prominently on our website, which we are about to relaunch to reflect the merger of the two prior chapters in Michigan to SABR Southern Michigan. I want to mention, too, finally, just to set this up, the significance of Greenberg. This is a player whose story I knew almost nothing about, despite growing up in Michigan, seeing his name on the wall at Tiger Stadium, and now seeing his statue at Comerica Park. But it was only relatively recently, or only within the last several years, that I first watched Aviva's film and read John's biography, and just gained a new appreciation for just how incredible it was that the first Jewish superstar came of age, came to prominence in the 1930s in the midst of a wave of anti-Semitism in Europe and in America and in Detroit as well. And the achievement, the accomplishment of how much he excelled on the field and then how he served his country after that, sacrificing his chance for some of baseball's biggest records, make him, to me, one of the most compelling stories in Tigers history and in baseball history. So I think it's of incredible importance that we continue to remember and research and celebrate and spread the story of Hank Greenberg and what he meant both on and off the field. So enjoy these highlights from our event and enjoy the rest of SABR Day.
Well, nice to be with you, and John and Aviva, especially nice to be with the two of you. You know, I was born in 1948. My dad's last year playing was 1947, so I never saw him play other than in a couple of old-timers games. As I recall, he popped up to the catcher one time and the shortstop the other time. So I never saw his prolific batting credentials as a kid. We grew up in Cleveland. My dad was general manager of the Indians in the 50s. Some excellent teams, as you baseball aficionados know. And I was an Indians fan, not a Tigers fan. My dad was the general manager of the hometown team, not the home run hitting star of the 30s and 40s in Detroit. So I really grew up thinking of him as the general manager of the Cleveland Indians. He was known in Cleveland in that capacity. So I knew he'd been a player and obviously understood that, but it really wasn't until we left Cleveland when I was 11, moved back to New York in 1959. And in those early teenage years that I began to understand the role that he had played and the status he had in the broader community. He was no longer associated with the hometown team, but people would stop him on the street and, say hi, whether they knew him or not, and greet him. And you would have had to be oblivious to not understand that something was going on there beyond his being a general manager. So we didn't talk about it much in those years, but whether by osmosis or reading or otherwise, I figured out that he had been obviously a star player. In terms of his relationship with the Jewish community, it really was even after that, probably in my college years, in my 20s and beyond, and increasingly, funnily enough, over time, increasingly as the years went by and as the distance grew between his last days as a player and the present day, that it almost amplified the sense that here's a guy who hadn't played in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years as time went by, who was still remembered in bar mitzvah speeches by 13-year-old boys whose grandfathers had seen him play, rabbis who would stop me when I'd meet them and they knew my heritage, and just other people, and how much Hank meant to them, not just as a ball player, but as a person in that period of time. So it really accumulated over time. There's no epiphany, no one moment, but it's come, I think, for all of our family. My daughter, who may or may not be on this call, Melanie, told me that she lives in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, that someone that she encountered there found out that she was the granddaughter of Hank Greenberg somehow and made a big deal out of it. So it's taken place over a long period of time, and it's not really ebbing. I think he, in Detroit, especially in the Detroit Jewish community, but really around the country, he continues to be a symbol of that we can all be proud of.
It was September 5th, 1986, and I'm getting dressed, and I was in Los Angeles, interesting enough, and I'm getting dressed to open up my first film called Partisans of Vilna, about Jews fighting Nazis. And I said, oh my gosh, I just started crying, because growing up in Detroit, my father had been an immigrant Jew who had gone in the army. He had faced anti-Semitism in the army. After the war, he had moved with my mother, who was a survivor. I was born in Berlin, to Detroit, and he loved baseball, as many immigrants did. And he brought my brother up and I to love baseball. But the ritual was every Yom Kippur, he would take my brother and I to services. And later on, my parents were divorced, so we were with him. And I would always hear the story about how Hank Greenberg hadn't played in 34. The opening night of Yom Kippur, it's called Kol Nidra. I thought Hank Greenberg was part of Kol Nidra services. So the minute I heard, I said, okay, I got to go make this film. And actually, I call it my bat mitzvah film. It took 13 years, but Steve and the family were a big reason why I was able to pull it off.
Today. I remember the day I was driving in my car and a story came on, All Things Considered, that talked about Aviva's film. And I grew up a baseball fan. I grew up in Minneapolis, so I grew up a Twins fan. The Tigers were not my favorite team, I'll admit. But I heard this story about Hank Greenberg, and I knew, history of the game, but I'd never understood the place that Hank Greenberg occupied in terms of cultural significance in America. And as I was listening to this story on NPR over the radio, it became clear to me just how important he was. And I remember pulling into the parking lot of a shopping mall where I was going to make a stop, and I stayed in the car to listen to the end of the story because I was so taken by what I was learning about Hank Greenberg.